Did the War of the Worlds radio broadcast cause mass hysteria in 1938? The internet says, maybe? Welcome to The Internet Says It's True, a show where every week we learn something that sounds made up, but it's really true. Part of the WCBE podcast experience. My name's Michael Kent. Welcome back. Let's learn something new. This one is a weird episode because in the process of the research, I learned something I never knew, that the whole thing might not be true. And I thought I knew all about this. Later in the show, Jethro and Matt from the Drunkard's Walk podcast will be joining us, so stay tuned for that. They joined us way back when we talked about the Beatrice, Nebraska church miracle way back last year sometime. And this is exciting. There is merch up on the website now. So if you want a mug or a t-shirt to show your fandom of this show, you can do that. Just go to the website, click on merch. That'll take you there. Also, don't forget that Patreon members get special access to every episode a week early. They also get access to every episode ad-free and can watch the video recordings of my guest interviews, which are unedited, usually much longer than what you hear on the podcast. Thank you to Dallas Ray, our most recent gold level member. Just go to patreon.com/Michael Kent. Join up for as little as $1 a month. Also, send in your topics. If you know of something that sounds made up but is absolutely 100% true, I want to know about it. You can do that by visiting the website, filling out the form right there on the sidebar of the homepage. This week's topic comes to us from CJ.
Hey, Michael, it's CJ down here in Texas. I was wondering if maybe you could look into the Orson Welles War of the Worlds. I've always heard that it caused like a nationwide panic. But lately I've been hearing some stuff that maybe that's not necessarily true. Maybe you could look into it. Thanks, man.
Thanks, CJ. I've always assumed that this story was true, and I love this story because it's sort of a breaking down of the fourth wall of radio. It's an early version of what movies like The Paranormal Activity and Blair Witch Project did for film, blurring the line between drama and reality. And I like it because there's something just a little bit ethically ambiguous about it, and that really helps to immerse the viewer in the story. And if the goal of art is to elicit emotion, this is a really effective way of doing that. So let's travel all the way back to 1938. It was the evening of October 30th, 1938. Orson Welles had walked into the Columbia Broadcasting Building on Madison Avenue, knowing it was going to be an interesting evening broadcast. He was scheduled to present the regular series Mercury Theater on the Air, a weekly hour-long broadcast. He'd been inspired by a radio play he acted in the year before called The Fall of the City, and that was a story about a conqueror that comes back from the dead to rule the city, but it was really an allegory on fascism. It made Orson Welles an overnight sensation in radio, and the style was something that was new. This new fad was taking hold that had been made popular by a radio program called The March of Time, the idea of telling a dramatized story as a live radio broadcast. Welles experimented with the realistic-sounding radio broadcast storytelling format a couple more times in the next year with an as-it-happens drama called Air Raid and a historical piece about Julius Caesar. But what he had planned for the Halloween special was something bigger, something special, and he knew it would be groundbreaking. He discussed the idea of adapting a piece of sci-fi for a radio broadcast with producers John Houseman and Paul Stewart. They decided on a 19th century piece of sci-fi set in England, H.G. Wells's The War of the Worlds. Howard Koch adapted the H.G. Wells work to a radio format for CBS by modernizing it. He took the setting from the original 19th century England to New Jersey in present day, choosing the tiny unincorporated community of Grover's Mill. The plot remained basically the same, aliens from Mars invading Earth. The dramatic piece began with a monologue similar to the novel.
We know now that in the early years of the 20th century, this world was being watched closely by intelligences greater than man's, and yet as mortal as his own.
From then, the radio play took the form of an as-it-happens news radio program, even playing music and then interrupting that music with news bulletins. First reporting that scientists have noticed unusual gas explosions on the planet Mars, then getting more serious.
Ladies and gentlemen, we interrupt our program of dance music to bring you a special bulletin from the Intercontinental Radio News. At 20 minutes before 8 Central Time, Professor Farrell of the Mount Jennings Observatory, Chicago, Illinois, reports observing several explosions of incandescent gas occurring at regular intervals on the planet Mars. The spectroscope indicates the gas to be hydrogen and moving toward the Earth with enormous velocity.
The first two-thirds of the radio program went on like this, and to anyone who just tuned in, it would sound like a real news broadcast. There were weather reports and a supposed live broadcast of a musical performance from a local hotel, Ramon Raquello and his orchestra. In fact, it was Welles's intention to make these musical interludes last an uncomfortably long amount of time in order to add realism to the live broadcast style. A little bit after talking about the gas explosions on Mars, we hear about a strange meteorite landing.
Now, nearer home, comes a special bulletin from Trenton, New Jersey. It is reported that at 8:50 p.m., a huge flaming object, believed to be a meteorite, fell on a farm in the neighborhood of Grover's Mill, New Jersey, 22 miles from Trenton. The flash in the sky was visible within a radius of several hundred miles, and the noise of the impact was heard as far north as Elizabeth.
The broadcast was so realistic, we even go on to hear screams and a moment of dead air, something that was a huge no-no in the conventional rules of radio. And using our own conventional rules of podcasting, we need to take a quick break here to tell you about some of our supporters. Do you suffer from a crippling sense that your world is crumbling around you? Do the brief, fleeting moments of respite you cling to always seem to pass unregarded into the silent void? Do you wish you could spend time with thoughtful intellectuals who are similarly ignoring the dark, unwavering nothingness that creeps into your peripheral vision like some sort of stalking, eldritch horror show? Well, that sucks. Instead, why not listen to Man Bites Dog, a weekly podcast from Polite Company? Every week, hosts Michael Hill, Grant Hangeveld, and R-Case Hill dive into the weirdest news headlines from around the world in a game show that's often unfunny, inappropriate, and just freaking weird. Man Bites Dog is available now wherever you get your podcasts.
Hi, I'm Dan Skinner, host of Prognosis Ohio, a health and healthcare podcast that's a proud part of the WCBE podcast experience. Some people have told me that I should take the show national, focusing on the U.S., but as we head into 2022, I want to tell you that we're keeping the focus right here on Central Ohio and our community, just like WCBE itself. Check out Prognosis Ohio wherever you get your podcasts and listen to episodes at WCBE.org. It's under the Podcast Experience tab.
There was a time that humans used 100% organic products as healing balms and moisturizers for their skin. Well, I've partnered with an awesome company that wants to get back to those times. Fatco sells organic and responsibly made tallow-based skincare products. For centuries, humans used tallow in skin moisturizers and healing balms, but unfortunately, the topical application of these fats seemed to stop around the same time that animal fats stopped being considered part of a healthy diet. A lot of modern skincare products do more harm than good by stripping your skin of its natural oils. Let's change that. You can try them out now at fatco.com and get 15% off your order by using my promo code INTERNET. Go to theinternetsaysitstrue.com/deals for the link. Let's get back to our story.
We take you now to Grover's Mill, New Jersey.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Carl Phillips again, out at the Wilmot Farm, Grover's Mill, New Jersey. Professor Pearson and myself made the 11 miles from Princeton in 10 minutes. Well, I hardly know where to begin. To paint for you a word picture of the strange scene before my eyes, like something out of a modern Arabian Nights. Well, I just got here. I haven't had a chance to look around yet. I guess that's it. Yes, I guess that's the thing directly in front of me. Half buried in a vast pit. Must have struck with terrific force. The ground is covered with splinters of a tree. It must have struck on its way down. But I can see the object itself doesn't look very much like a meteor. At least not the meteors I've seen. It looks more like a huge cylinder.
Eventually, in the radio play, the Martians are attacking, and the broadcast focuses on the military units that are trying and failing, and we hear those broadcasts from the different military radios. Then, it turns to a supposed reporter on the roof of a building in Manhattan, watching giant alien machines attack the city. The drama intensifies, and then we hear the reporter become desperate.
Wait for the others. They rise like a line of new towers on the city's west side. Now they're lifting their metal hands. This is the end now. Smoke comes out, black smoke drifting over the city. People in the streets see it now. They're running toward the East River, thousands of them, dropping in like rats. Now the smoke's spreading faster. It's reached Times Square. People are trying to run away from it, but it's no use. They're falling like flies. Now the smoke's crossing 6th Avenue, 5th Avenue, 100 yards away. It's 50 feet.
There are a few moments of silence, and then we get the very first indication since the program began that this isn't real.
You are listening to a CBS presentation of Orson Welles and the Mercury Theater on the Air in an original dramatization of The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. The performance will continue after a brief intermission. This is the Columbia Broadcasting System.
There were only 4 instances throughout the entire broadcast to let listeners know it wasn't real. The opening, before and after the middle commercial break, and at the very end. The commercial break itself was delayed a few minutes later than usual to increase the realism of the piece. Later that night, 3 different times, disclaimers were read on the air to reiterate the piece was merely fiction. And the popular story about this broadcast, the reason anyone remembers it from the thousands of other radio plays in history, came about because of the many newspaper headlines that talked about it afterward. Headlines like, "Radio Fake Scares Nation," and "Fake Radio War Stirs Terror Through U.S.," and a lighted bulletin in Times Square reading, "Orson Welles Causes Panic." The broadcast had started at 8 p.m. that night. By 8:32 p.m., the CBS executive Davidson Taylor was on the phone taking a frantic phone call. Producer John Houseman said Taylor returned to the studio looking white as a ghost. He had been ordered by the higher-ups at CBS to immediately interrupt the broadcast to announce that it was a dramatic work of fiction. Luckily for Wells and Houseman, there was a scheduled commercial break less than a minute away from that phone call anyway. That commercial break carried disclaimers about the program before and after, like you just heard. But as the show continued on, a few policemen entered the room outside the studio. Then a few more. CBS pages and executives stood in front of the police, begging them to just wait. The police wanted to barge into the studio and stop the broadcast immediately. They, of course, weren't allowed into the room. The program continued. The final third of the show was a more standard radio drama format without the realism of the news report break-ins and weather bulletins. We learn the rest of the story, that the aliens have now taken New York City and eventually have died of human pathogenic germs. The broadcast ended with Orson Welles once again telling the listeners that they've been listening to a radio play and that it was merely a holiday offering for Halloween. According to Houseman, the next few hours were crazy. Here's a quote from his 1980 memoir. Quote, "The building was suddenly full of people in dark blue uniforms. Hustled out of the studio, we were locked into a small back office on another floor. Here we sat incommunicado while network employees were busily collecting, destroying, or locking up all scripts and records of the broadcast." End quote. They apparently fielded a call from a small-town mayor who complained that his citizens were rioting in the streets. One of the reasons that is often given for the panic is that people were listening to another program on the radio, then switched to the War of the Worlds after the opening disclaimer. Another reason for the panic that's cited is that radio broadcasts for weeks had been updating America on the growing war between Germany and Czechoslovakia, so people were already on edge. They were used to hearing important news bulletins interrupting their radio shows. The newspaper headlines followed, and the rest became a lasting legacy. Most people today know the story about how this radio broadcast sent Americans into a panic. But there are more than a couple reasons to doubt that it actually caused any sort of widespread panic. Robert Bartholomew, a sociologist who is an expert on mass panic outbreaks, has said there's a growing consensus among sociologists that the extent of the panic was greatly exaggerated. First, there simply weren't enough people listening. One of the pieces of evidence of panic is this treasure trove of 2,000 letters mailed to CBS and Orson Welles complaining about the broadcast. But when they were scrutinized, only about 27% of those letters came from people who were actually listening. It was originally reported that 12 million, or 1 out of 12 homes, were listening to the War of the Worlds. But a survey was actually conducted that night during the broadcast. They had a sample size of only 5,000, but out of that 5,000, only 2% said they were listening to it. After all, it was up against the most popular show of the time, Edgar Bergen's Chase and Sanborn Hour variety show. Mercury Theater on the Air had horrible ratings. Another survey, which was conducted later at Princeton, estimated the real number listening was closer to 6 million. When those people were asked if they were, quote, frightened or disturbed by the show, 1.2 million said they were. But there's sort of an inherent problem with that question. In that era, radio had the power to move people. It had the ability to shock, to frighten, and disturb. It would be like asking you about the scariest movie you've ever seen and ask if it frightened or disturbed you. So this brings us to what is most likely the reason for the overblowing of panic. Newspapers. Newspapers, whose existence was threatened by social media, and before that was threatened by online news, and before that was threatened by television news. Newspapers were threatened by radio. It was in their best interest to get the public to have a healthy distrust of what they heard on the radio. So these many newspaper stories talking about the mass chaos and public panic caused by the broadcast could have had a motive, whether conscious or unconscious, of telling the public, look at this new medium and take it with a grain of salt because, unlike a trusty newspaper, the radio can mislead the public. Take the New York Times, for instance, who said, quote, radio is new, but it has adult responsibilities. It has not mastered itself or the material it uses. So while the cultural lore about the War of the Worlds is one of groundbreaking realism and a story about not trusting everything you hear, the truth is probably a story that gives much more credit to the public at large. And proving that nothing is new under the sun and proving history always repeats itself, the same thing happens today on social media. Celebrity death hoaxes are a weekly occurrence on Twitter. Fake news gets spread on Facebook by people who don't take the time to find out whether or not it's a true story. And certain news stations don't cover major news events because of their own political interests. So in that way, what Orson Welles was doing really was groundbreaking. It was one of the first instances of nationwide trolling. We've now come to the part of the podcast where I call a friend, and today we're calling Jethro and Matt from the Drunkard's Walk podcast. These guys have a really fun concept for a podcast, and I really enjoy listening to it. I want to let them describe it for you. The Drunkard's Walk podcast. Now, it's so good to have Jethro and Matt back. How would you describe your podcast? Because I feel like I was going to get it wrong. So walk us through, if pardon the pun, walk us through like what a Drunkard's Walk is, because that's a saying that I didn't know, and B, what the Drunkard's Walk podcast is doing.
Well, Jethro, I'm going to let you explain what a Drunkard's Walk is as a term, because that's what I always get wrong.
Okay, so a Drunkard's Walk is also called a random walk, and it's the idea that if two people leave from a common point of origin and then randomly turn at intersections, they'll eventually run into each other, which is the same as a single person randomly turning will eventually end up at their point of origin. So it's a mathematical idea that we have completely ripped off and not really applied any mathematical context to. But we've taken that idea and we've thrown it into Wikipedia. And Matt, I'm going to let you take it from there.
Oh gosh, thank you, Jethro. This is very unlike us, yielding the floor to each other. But we essentially we start at a particular topic. We started the very beginning of the podcast at Random Walk or Drunkard's Walk, and we get a topic from a listener, and we journey off through Wikipedia, only using the links on the pages to get from that starting topic to whatever that ending topic may be, and they're all random. We say they're random because we don't know what they're going to be, and they're being generated by our users who don't know where we're starting. So they just give us something that is either on their mind or something they find interesting. We've definitely gotten things that I had never heard of before, which is definitely my favorite types of walks.
Yeah, I have really enjoyed it because this podcast is also sort of a random trivia podcast. And, so, while my topics are always sort of, since it needs to carry an episode, they sort of have to have a beginning, middle, and end. There have to be yours, or sometimes it's just like a phrase or some sort of scientific thing that I've never heard of. And all of a sudden, now we're looking into it. We're learning how it goes from one thing to another. And then it comes back around to the original thing somehow.
Yeah, that's exactly it. In fact, somebody compared it to the show from I think it was the early 80s or 70s, Connections. If you've ever seen that
Not
show.
familiar.
I'm trying to remember the host's name. I think it's James Burke.
Okay.
I believe is his name. But it was a show. It was I want to say BBC show that was shown on PBS here. And they essentially just went through it would just start on something and then it would be and this is how it's connected all the way through all of these other things to, they'd start on the telephone and they would end up on rice pudding or something like that. It was this incredible connection which we hadn't thought about, but I was oh, that's a pretty good comparison if you've ever heard of it, which of course most people haven't. So
I'm sure also it gets, the idea when you talk about the Drunkard's Walk thing, the 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon gets brought up occasionally. There's someone on TikTok who does a really interesting version of this where I don't remember exactly how it works, but they will just give the person a Facebook picture or a Facebook profile or something of a person, and then there's a completely different random person, and this guy connects these two strangers that have never met and don't know each other and don't even know that they're being involved in this experiment. And he finds a way to connect these people. He's like, well, this person went to this high school, and this other person went to this high school, and their teacher was this person who used to work at this high school, and here's that football team, and this football team has a mother who, was on the whatever. And it's absolutely crazy. I love stuff like that. It's just like the most rabbit hole you've ever heard of. And it's nothing but web sleuthing, and I dig it. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. I mean, and it also goes to show just how interconnected the world is. I mean, that's all based on a Stanley Milgram experiment where he just dropped letters. He sent letters to random people and said, hey, can you find this particular doctor in New York? I think it was. And just said, we assume you don't know this person, but send it to somebody who you think could get it one step closer. And they found that it took about 6 degrees to get there. Wow. Which is how, and later got applied to Kevin Bacon. Although if you analyze the IMDb, Kevin Bacon isn't even the actor with the greatest degree of connectivity to everybody else. You know who is?
Who?
Rod Steiger. So Rod Steiger has the lowest number of degrees of distance to everybody else in IMDb.
Yeah, it pretty much it almost, you would think there are some character actors with lower degrees than, some major names, because
the benefit that Rod Steiger has is that he had such a long career, and performed with so many A-list people that he showed up in a ton of stuff.
Yeah, wow, interesting. That's really interesting. So I brought you on the show to talk about something about which you do not know yet. And I was looking at these questions before we started, and dang it, I think I made them too easy this week. Now, I'm going to say that, and I don't want you, if you do get some of these wrong, I don't want you to feel bad, but I was trying to make them difficult. So I just looked at them, and I'm like, I think you're going to get some of these. So for this first question, we're going to play for a joke. If you get it right, I have to tell a joke. If you get it wrong, you'll tell me one. And Matt's already told me he's got some ready to go. So
I do.
Here's your question. Number 1. This 1938 radio play caused panic because people thought it was real, though the scope of the panic is disputed. Was it A, Journey to the Center of the Earth, B, The Screaming Woman, or C, The War of the Worlds?
Yeah, I know the answer to this one, Jethro. Do you know the answer to this one?
Oh, I read that incredibly magnificent Orson Welles biography by Simon Cowell, so I know this one. Yeah, this is definitely War of the Worlds.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly.
Although I do want to hear Matt's joke and your joke, Michael. So.
We can both tell our jokes. Okay. The answer, of course, is The War of the Worlds. And the reason that this became so interesting to me this week as I started looking into it is this last part about the scope of the panic being disputed. And it turns out, like a lot of things, like marijuana, it was the newspapers that really blew this out of proportion because they were threatened. And they wanted people to start questioning the legitimacy of what they heard on the radio. So while there was some panic, it wasn't the whole like cities of people running into the streets screaming like we're sort of led to believe when you hear the lore about the War of the Worlds broadcast.
I mean, it's hard to believe that the media would sensationalize something in an unrealistic way. I'm just going to have to wrap my mind around that.
Can you imagine? I compared it to sort of the today's, like, you get like the celebrity death hoaxes once a week on Twitter. You know, I guess, you don't really see them quite as much as you used to. But when Kobe Bryant died, I thought it was a death hoax because he was one that I feel like I would occasionally see Kobe Bryant death hoaxes. And when he died, I think a lot of people were like, it was kind of the boy who cried wolf with that. They were like, it's another hoax.
Yeah.
So here's a horrible, horrible joke. Why did the cross-eyed teacher lose her job? Because she couldn't control her pupils.
Oh boy!
I told you it was bad.
That's a real Laffy Taffy joke.
Yeah, these are all popsicle stick jokes.
Good deal.
I love it.
What do you got for me, Matt? You got a joke?
I do actually. I have sort of two. So it's great that you set the scene with that because it lowers the bar for me, which I love.
Right.
So mine is what did the two hydrogens say to the oxygen?
What?
What are you doing here?
Oh my God.
And you know what my favorite thing about water is?
What?
I think it's pretty clear.
Oh, jeez.
Wow.
So what are you doing here? I can't help but picture the Californians sketch from SNL.
Yes. Yeah.
What are you doing here? That's good. Very good. All right. So you're 1 for 1. Let's move on. Question 2. For this question, we are playing for a strange or surprising fact about ourselves. So if you get it wrong, you've each got to share something about yourself that people might be shocked to know. And if you get it right, I'll share one about myself. The man who adapted The War of the Worlds from H.G. Wells' original book to a radio play for CBS was Howard Koch. What ended Howard Koch's career writing screenplays and radio dramas? Was it A, he joined the army and was declared missing in action in Europe? B, he was blacklisted for being a supposed communist? Or C, he was fired for inciting panic with the War of the Worlds?
Well,
this one I do not know for sure the answer to.
I don't know, but I suspect it's communism. Because the Mercury Theater were the ones who did War of the Worlds, and they had a big success on Broadway with The Cradle Will Rock, which later got made into a film, I think by Tim Robbins, like a decade or so ago. But they were all big lefty socialist types, and I would not at all be surprised, given the House Un-American Activities Commission and their keen interest in anybody who was socialist or communist. It seems like that is a heavy possibility.
I love your reasoning, Jethro, but I don't think you're right. Because if the movie Clue taught me anything, it's that communism is always a red herring. So I'm going to have to go with A, about him being declared missing in Europe.
All right. Well, for the correct answer, we now go to Howard Koch himself. I'm just kidding. He's long dead. That would be awesome. No. So the answer is B. He was blacklisted for being a supposed communist. Jethro is right. Matt, you are 1 for 2. Jethro is 2 for 0. This was, okay, so at 1943, at the request of Jack L. Warner of Warner Brothers, Koch wrote the screenplay for Mission to Moscow. The movie subsequently spawned controversy because of its positive portrayal of Stalin and the Soviet Union. After the war, Koch was fired by Warner because Koch was denounced as a communist. He was then criticized by the very committee mentioned by Jethro, the HUAC, for his outspoken leftist political views. He was blacklisted by 51.
Wow.
So now he did finish his career writing, but I believe he had to move to Europe to do that. So.
Where they probably couldn't find him at some point, right? So in a way, we're both right.
I don't think he joined the army, which was necessary for A to be true.
Well, at least not the U.S. Army. Yeah, maybe. maybe a different one.
Comrade Koch. Yes. So let's see, Matt. Do you have something surprising or strange that we would learn about you?
I am part of a group that is in the Guinness Book of World Records.
What for?
Yeah, for the longest musical march. I was involved in that in 1996. We broke the world record for the longest consecutive musical march.
Okay, what you played an instrument?
I did, yes. I played the saxophone. Was in marching band all through high school. Was the drum major, all that jazz. So,
and when you say longest musical march, like distance, is that what this is referring to?
So a friend of mine decided that he wanted to do this and kind of organize it as a fundraiser. And we marched 50.2 miles.
Oh my gosh!
By marching around a shopping mall, like the outside of a shopping mall, 20 something times, because it was like a 2 mile.
That is horrible
route. Yeah,
that's horrible. When I was in the Ohio State marching band, we marched in a parade that was like 4 miles, and it was awful. That was a really long parade. Now, granted, we were doing, a full, alternating between 180 and 120 beats per minute, playing songs the whole way, and like full out, but it was awful. And people complained before us, older, people that had been in the band before and after, complained about the Rose Bowl parade, which is, I believe, 5 or 6 miles. But that's well, okay. So I, since Jethro got this right, I owe you another a fact about myself, and I'll stick with a marching band one. When I was in the Ohio State band, I believe it was my second year in the band, I was actually suspended from a game. So this would have been the 1999 Penn State home game. I was suspended because when the band shows up if it's a noon kick, the band shows up at 9, and band showed up at 7, and the drums, that's right, the drum section would show up at 5. And we would be on the field practicing at 5:30, just the drums practicing the pregame entrance. And they had installed a new ramp. They had renovated the stadium, installed a new ramp onto the field with a new gate. And even though we had gone through the legwork of having them, let them know that we needed to be on the field and open that gate, no one did. And so me and I think like 2 or 3 other people, we sort of broke the gate so that we could get into the field. And it caused a huge thing. It was a big deal, and looking back, it's like so silly, but they, the athletic department people were trying to say I was going to be slammed with breaking and entering and all this stuff, but I needed the section to practice. So this is actually my 4th year, because I was a squad leader of the section at that point. So yeah, that was my suspension.
The one thing that strains credulity about your story, Michael, is the idea that percussionists would be early for anything.
This is true.
I've known too many drummers to know that they're going to show up 2 hours earlier than the rest of the band.
That was 20 years ago, and to this day, I am early for everything because of that band. The saying, and it's a saying with a lot of groups, but to be early is to be on time is to be late is to be forgotten. And that, if you were, and we literally, like, I remember being on trips when the band bus would leave and there were people chasing it because they were a few minutes late. That was a real rule. And to this day, like I said, I am still early for everything because of it. Wow, which drives me crazy.
There's an old quote, I forget who said it, but I know people who've made careers out of just being on time.
Yeah,
like it's astounding to me that there are grown people who have so many aspects of their lives together who can't figure out that, showing up on time is a courtesy to the people you're meeting. And
I would love to be on time, but my curse is that I have to be early for everything, and sometimes unreasonably so. So I always book the first flight into whatever city I'm getting into, and then have extra time, because I'm like, I'm going to miss it. I have a little bit of anxiety about that. And if I'm driving, I get to the city too soon, and which is sometimes cool because I get to go out and see local things, which is nice.
Yeah.
But I would love to be just on time once.
How early do you arrive at the airport?
At the airport, okay, so home airport is a different story than away airport. So
Sure.
away airport, I generally shoot for 2 hours before the flight.
Mm-hmm.
Home airport, I will sometimes wake up 2 hours before the flight.
Oh,
Because
okay.
I know things are figured out. I know exactly what everything takes, and there are less variables. Also now it's different now. Everything's a little bit different now with flying. There are many more variables now, but
Sure.
I just knew how long it takes. It took 15 minutes to get from my house to the parking lot at the airport. 10 minutes to get through from there through security. It's all timed out really well. So, all in all, I might be sitting there with 45 minutes until I board, which is a great amount of time to, it's not too much. It gives me time to get a coffee. But yeah, when I'm in a weird city, I don't know, like sometimes you get there and they don't have like a list for Southwest, and then you gotta wait in a long line that you weren't anticipating, and it's that one where there's like a sports team in front of you, and it just takes forever.
Or a marching band.
Or a marching band in front of you, and they're like, we're making a Guinness World Record for the longest airplane wait. And then you gotta
and we were all here early because otherwise we would have been in trouble. So.
Yeah, that's true. Well, question 3. For this question, we're playing for an IOU, for a coveted The Internet Says It's True sticker. These are very hard to come by, extremely valuable, and completely run out at this point. Here's your question. In another instance of people mistaking a work of dramatic fiction for reality, a movie director, Ruggero Deodato, I think is how you pronounce that, Ruggero Deodato, was once arrested for murder because authorities believed people in the film were actually being killed. Which one of these was the film? A, The Blair Witch Project, 1999. B, Cannibal Holocaust, 1980. Or C, Long Pigs, 2007.
Ooh.
Wow.
Well, I'll throw Blair Witch right out. Because I feel like that was a big sensation, and people knew enough about that movie that and also I don't remember anyone. I mean, I saw it once in the theater because I got swept up in this was like the first made, or not the first, but it was a big phenomenon in the 90s about like they made it themselves on a shoestring budget, and it's the darling of Sundance. And
the idea behind that was it was found footage, right? So if there was a director, in that story, then it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So I agree with you. I would eliminate that as well.
All right. So now we have Cannibal Holocaust. Was that?
Cannibal Holocaust or Long Pigs.
So Long Pig. I do know that Long Pig.
Hang on just a second. I'm losing the audio here for a second. Okay. Go ahead on that one again.
So I do know this. Long Pig is what cannibals in, I believe, Papua New Guinea refer to human meat as.
Oh.
So both films have a cannibal flavor to them, if you'll pardon the mild wordplay.
I will not pardon it.
Well, you're going to get more of it.
Good.
I've got a meaty... In fact, Matt, you're looking rather delicious this evening.
What are you talking about?
So they're both cannibal movies then.
Yeah.
If my guess about Long Pig is correct. But Cannibal Holocaust has a much more provocative title.
It does. In 1980, I feel like it feels like there's a greater chance of that type of thing happening in 1980
because people were
versus
dumber
2007.
in the past. Is that right?
Yeah.
Is that?
What's that?
Well, 1980 was like around the time of Satanic Panic. In the States, where people were freaking out about everything. So I think maybe there's a good chance. And also, when you have the internet, it's so much easier to look up information about a movie. And Long Pig was what, 2007?
Yeah, 2007. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So that's during internet time. So yeah, I like Cannibal Holocaust 1980. Final answer.
All right, Jethro. How about you, Matt?
I'm going to go with Long Pig.
Okay, you're going with the Long Pigs, 2007.
Just to be different.
The answer is Cannibal Holocaust 1980.
And
Jethro, 3 for 3. Matt, 1 for 3. So the charges were dropped once the guy proved that the actors had not been brutally murdered. However, this is interesting. He could not provide that same evidence for the animals that appeared in Cannibal Holocaust. He initially denied that any animals had been harmed. It turned out that many actually were, and as a result, the film was widely banned due to the cruelty to animals. So it became really hard to find that movie. It became sort of an underground cult classic. But yeah, when it came out, people thought that he was actually having people murdered on camera.
Wow.
That's
I remember
craziness.
that was so like, I don't know if you guys ever saw Faces of Death.
Yeah.
There's like a whole series of things where allegedly like actual murders were there in the movie.
Yeah,
and I have no idea of the veracity of that or not.
Well, from what I understand, it was mixed because some of a lot of that footage was faked. You know, there was a very famous electrocution scene in a prison that was faked. There was a very famous magician sawing someone in half on accident, you know, with blood and everything, and that was fake. But I think they actually they sprinkled in like news footage of real things happening. You know, like I tend to think that there was maybe one of the Iranian hostage crisis was in a scene on, I don't know. Those were the popular videos to rent from Blockbuster when I was a kid. Like when you get a bunch of guys together, you get, I got Faces of Death. You know, they had one in, and you watch.
We got my dad to rent it for us. Me and my two brothers.
Yes.
And from that moment on, I questioned my dad's judgment because I'm like, why the hell would you rent Faces of Death for your teenage children?
Because he asked for it. That's why. That's all you need. So, Jethro, you get a sticker. Matt, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. This is just for those that don't listen to Drunkard's Walk. This is exactly how it goes every time. Jethro has an idea, and he's like, "I think this is the right way to go," and I say, "No, it's definitely not," and then it absolutely is 100% of the time. So I'm glad that we're just playing into the same brand here.
Yeah. Well, don't think that I'm not going to snip a bit of Michael's dialogue from earlier when he said Jethro is right and just play that on a loop in the background.
You can use it, as like an audio drop throughout different episodes.
I'm going to be like a drive time DJ with my whammo button. Jethro is right.
Great. That'll be great.
For this
now the pressure's on. I got to get the fourth question right.
And I have a feeling you both will get this next one right because, I just have a feeling you guys know this. For this question, we're going to play for a plug on your podcast. So if you get it wrong, you've got to plug this show on your own show. If you get it right, I'm happy to plug your show on next week's episode of this show. So here it is. Orson Welles starred in Citizen Kane, which obviously many film aficionados call the greatest of all time, very close to that time that he performed the War of the Worlds radio broadcast. The two were very close chronologically. Was Citizen Kane before or after the War of the Worlds?
Oh, no. So I feel like Citizen Kane is 39. Does that sound right, Jethro? Do you have any memory?
I'm not helping you on this
one,
Matt. You're on your own.
Oh, do you know?
I know.
You see, Jethro's confident in this
one. I mean, to be fair though, I'm confident even when I'm wrong. So that's not really a signifier.
That's fair. But you know which one came first already? Like you don't even have to try to figure it out? You already know this?
Correct.
Oh, that's a shame.
But
right.
I want to watch you struggle, so go ahead.
So you're going to make me answer first.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. So I guess I seem to think that War of the Worlds came first. I don't know why, because in my mind that's 38 and Citizen Kane is 39, but I could have that all mixed up. So, but I'm going to say I'm not sure which way you asked the question, but I'm going to say War of the Worlds came first. Citizen Kane came second. That's my.
All right, and Jethro?
War of the Worlds definitely came first. Citizen Kane was 1941, I believe.
Oh.
The answer is both of you are correct. 1941 was Citizen Kane. War of the Worlds was 1938. Citizen Kane really, even though Orson Welles had really become very popular on radio just before War of the Worlds, like the year before. War of the Worlds made him like national celebrity. Citizen Kane even more so. And it's kind of interesting to see some of the production on Citizen Kane very similar to some of the people that worked on War of the Worlds, including the composer for both was Bernard Let me look this up because I looked it up earlier, and I don't want to get it wrong. 1938. Bernard. Some of the people who are listening who know this are screaming the answer. The composer of the music is Bernard. Oh man, now I can't find it.
There are two 85-year-old men screaming at their podcast right now.
Bernard Herrmann.
Bernard Herrmann. Yeah, you know, I was going to say it, and then I was like, no, I'm going to be wrong. I don't want to say it out loud.
Bernard Herrmann and his orchestra arrived at the studio where Welles had taken over production for the evening's program. And what they did was they faked having like this ballroom jazz dance band playing. And so when War of the Worlds begins, you can hear them playing La Comparsita, and that is interrupted with a science bulletin, a weather bulletin about the weather on Mars and how there are explosions happening on the planet Mars that are observable. So really interesting stuff. And then he did, of course, all of the score to Citizen Kane. And I had no idea exactly how involved Welles was in Citizen Kane. It was writer, director, producer, lead actor. That was his movie. And
yeah,
it's been a while since I've seen the movie about the movie, the RKO 207, 281. Yeah, what a great biography of Orson Welles that became. So.
It's funny because if you ever go on a tour of the Hearst Castle in California, it's a beautiful place. But they bear a tremendous grudge against Herman Mankiewicz, who is the screenwriter on Citizen Kane, because he used to like hang out at Hearst Castle. and that's why he was able to get so many things right about William Randolph Hearst and why Citizen Kane got under Hearst's skin so much.
I love
it. And like to this day, the tour guides at the Hearst Castle really have a grudge against Herman Mankiewicz for that reason.
There's a lot of poetry here when you talk about like it was the newspaper's grudge against Orson Welles that really made War of the Worlds, gave it this panic. It made it famous, but it gave it this continued story after story after story, and then that it was really that same world, those magnates of the newspaper industry that he was punching up and making fun of on.
I wonder if Rupert Murdoch feels the same way about Succession.
Yeah, it would be really interesting to hear someone's thoughts on that. And I have heard a reaction. Gosh, I can't remember where I heard that. Somewhere it was like there was like a relative that was talking about how it's not able to be played in that house. Succession did an amazing job of treating Fox News with the way it should be treated.
And it's crazy too, because like these people, these moguls are multi-billionaires. They're the wealthiest people on earth. They have lives of immense privilege, and like they can't take any criticism. They can't see even a fictionalized version of themselves. It's banana pants.
Yeah, it is. You know what Welles said about the newspaper the newspaper coverage. So this was a quote from him to Roger Hill. He said this in 1983. He said, "It wasn't long after the initial shock that whatever public panic and outrage there was vanished, but the newspapers for days continued to feign fury." Mm-hmm. So he saw, he knew that's what was happening. That's the way he saw it, was the newspapers just attacking it for being what it was, a new medium.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Well,
right. and in so doing, they cemented its legend.
Yeah.
Like
they did.
If they hadn't done that, then we wouldn't be talking about it today. We'd be like, a radio broadcast from 1938? No thanks. Not interesting. But the newspapers made him. They made the legend of War of the Worlds.
Wouldn't it be interesting if you could ask Orson Welles about that now? I know.
I don't know. There's a lot of great audio of Orson Welles being a real jerk to people.
They're definitely.
there's a famous sort of captured audio from like a Mrs. Paul's fish stick commercial.
Yeah, it's great.
Where he's just a total jerk to the guys in the booth.
The one for the wine where he's drunk is so good. There's just take after take of him screwing up. It's champagne, I think. It's sparkling wine or something. It's so good. If you haven't seen that, go look that up.
It's all. I mean, it may be better than Citizen Kane as far as
I just read this. This is interesting. In 2002, Glenn Beck did a live recreation of the broadcast using the original Koch's original script, aired it on Buzz XM, and was sued.
Yeah, except Glenn Beck changed it so we were being illegal aliens were landing.
Right.
That's right.
There's a great they did a version of it in the 90s. I want to say may have even been the late 80s. I think it was the early 90s. Then many of the cast of Star Trek: The Next Generation were in it. Gates McFadden was in it, and I think Brent Spiner. And there's like I think it was on NPR.
I'm seeing it right now. Yeah, NPR did one in '88, and it was nominated for a Grammy Best Spoken Word. I'm gonna have to look that up and find it. That's really cool. So you're doing really well. Jethro's 4 for 4.
Jethro's doing very well.
You're 2 for 4, and we've got 1 left. So you can still beat a 500 record here, Matt.
Oh, come on.
This one is for all the marbles. If you get this wrong, I'm banning you both from the show, never to be asked on again. Here's your question. And this to be answered separately. Other than your own podcast, and other than this podcast, of course, what is currently your favorite podcast?
Jethro, you want to answer that first?
I'd be delighted to. So I'm a big cognitive science fan. I have a degree in psychology, and I just love learning about the mind and how it works. And there is a podcast called the Psychology Podcast by a guy, I believe named Scott Barry Kaufman, who just interviews different psychologists and sort of talks to them about their thing. And he's got a really wide breadth of people that he talks to. So some like real hardcore data people, and then some people who are more into what I would call the fringes of science.
Sure.
Like he talked to somebody recently about past lives, which is not really my bag, but it's at least interesting. But it's always a provocative conversation about, the human brain and how it works and how human brains work with other human brains. And I really enjoyed it. I learn something every time I listen, and it's always a provocative conversation.
How about you, Matt?
So I'm going to give you 2 answers because I have 2 favorites right now, depending on kind of my mood. If I'm in the mood to listen to, like if I'm just kind of working or need something on in the background, looking for some entertainment, Smartless is one of my faves right now with Jason Bateman and Sean Hayes and Will Arnett.
That's really good.
Where they bring on like one of them brings on a guest and then they just interview them, and they have all these amazing celebrities and scientists and composers and race car drivers, and anyway, it's very fun to listen to. And then the other one that I like to listen to a lot is Science Versus, which is where they take a topic that is usually in the news of some kind, and then they actually look into the science behind it. And it's very well done and incredibly educational. So I love that one.
Cool.
And also, Matt has a crush on the host,
Wendy Zuckerman. Oh my gosh, absolutely! She's the greatest voice in the world.
Since you guys are both recommending science type podcasts, I recommend you listen to a friend of mine has if you're into social psychology, it's called the Opinion Science Podcast by Andy Luttrell, Dr. Andy Luttrell.
Nice.
And it's all about why people believe what they believe. He's got a guest every week every episode talking about why people believe different things. It's really interesting, and he's an entertaining guy nonetheless. So I also love one called 20,000 Hertz, which is also science topics, but all based on audio.
Oh,
so there's some really interesting ones. Sometimes it's about music, sometimes it's just about different tones and things like that. So I like that one a lot. They've done some that are about sounds that you hear in the movies. Like what's the one scream that
the Wilhelm scream.
The Wilhelm scream that's in like every movie where someone screams. Stuff like that. They'll do an entire episode on things like that. So, well, you both answered that right, which means, Jethro, you went 5 for 5 and get this audio clip.
You did it! Congratulations!
Yay, you did it. And Matt, you went 3 for 5, which is not worthy of the audio clip, but still a winner. It's better than 500.
Better than 500.
That's right. And I feel like a couple of those you tanked just because you wanted to make it interesting.
I mean, maybe there's some gamesmanship. Maybe it's just the showmanship. I don't know. It's some kind of ship.
You are the John C. Reilly to my Will Ferrell in Talladega Nights. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay. Better than Step Brothers, where you're both idiots.
That's true.
So you can listen to the Drunkard's Walk podcast anywhere that you listen to podcasts. I highly recommend it. If you like this show, you will like that show. That's just how this works. Jethro and Matt, I thank you very much for taking some time with me this evening.
Thanks so much for having us on.
Well, that's all for this week. Thanks so much to CJ for the show topic and to Jethro and Matt from the Drunkard's Walk podcast for being my guests. Here's a space alien.
Thank you for listening to The Internet Says It's True. To listen to episodes ad-free and a week early, support us on Patreon. You can do that at patreon.com/Michael Kent. If you learned something just now that you didn't already know, go to the Apple Podcast app and leave us a review with 5 stars and a few words. That helps us a ton, because that's how the algorithm works. I don't know what an algorithm is, but just do it. See you next week for a brand new episode of The Internet Says It's True!
The Internet Says It's True would like to thank the Patreon subscribers whose monthly contributions help to make this show possible. Dallas Ray, Sean Brown, Bryce Swanson, Eugene Anderson, Matt McVeigh, Jim Martin, Joanne Martin, and the show's official Emperor Kick Track. The show is written and produced by me, Michael Kent. The theme song is by Finite Music Forge, and additional music this week was from Doug Maxwell Media Right Productions. All audio clips in this episode are used for education and commentary and used under Fair Use Title 17 USC Section 107. You can listen to past episodes by searching for The Internet Says It's True wherever you get your podcasts, and you can see bonus content at patreon.com/Michael Kent.